I was born a poor black child. Maybe not poor, but lower middle class. Maybe not black, but pretty pale. Probably about like I look right now. But my earliest memory was when my brother was born. I was 3 years old. And I had some McDonald's that I guess my dad got me. I was sitting in the backseat of our car, and my mom was coming out of the hospital in a wheelchair with my brother, and I dropped my cheeseburger on the floor of the car, and I stepped on it. I was hugely disappointed. This was my first real deal with losing food. Or whatever. My first run-in with cheeseburgers, let's say. So then my first intro into technology was my uncle used to have a camcorder. He'd come over and make little home movies of us and stuff. My dad used to be in a band. My brother later on joined a band. I had a lot of musical influences in my family and stuff, which is kind of like why I got into synthesizers and keyboards probably in like middle school or high school. Ferris Bueller was a big influence on us back then. Everybody wanted to have like a synthesizer that could play fart noises. Keyboards were pretty big back then. I think I would recommend growing up poor rather than having money. It just makes things more interesting. We weren't that poor, but we had like generic stuff a lot. Like we never had G.I. Joes. We would have like some generic version of like the little webbed feet guys. There was this guy that went to church with us. He always had G.I. Joes, and we'd borrow them and we'd look at them and be like, man, look at the detail on these. They actually move. They have articulating arms and legs, and you can put stuff in their hand because they have like a little hole in them. And it was just new to us. And like the Voltron was around, and then we had like a generic one, I think. And Transformers were huge, and we had like the generic GoBots. I actually had some transforming robots. I think it was as part of the GoBots. They transformed into rocks. They didn't transform into any cool vehicles or cars. They turned into rocks. And I've talked about this before. But yeah, that makes things kind of interesting. If you just have everything given to you, it's just not as fun. But in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, everything was like a cultural... It was the best time to be alive. I mean, if you had the internet back then, I think it would be even better. But then everybody would be stuck on their phones like they are today. But back then, we were like cultural sponges. We were like living in all of the things. Like Transformers, it was everywhere. It's not just... You probably, younger guys probably only seen the Transformer movies, but you don't know about the cartoons. And things weren't just cartoons. If it was a cartoon, it was also a cereal. It was also on a book bag. It was also on a Trapper Keeper. It was also on, name something. A comic book. There were Transformer comic books. I had those. Lunch boxes. People don't even take lunch boxes anymore, but you had any, like, there was like weird TV show lunch boxes. Like the Fall Guy. I remember a friend of mine was a big Fall Guy fan. I think he had one of those. Man, people don't even remember the Fall Guy. That's like, that's super old school. But you grew up in and around the culture, like Ninja Turtles and Voltron. When I was in kindergarten to first grade, I had this friend Neil. We used to draw robots because Transor Z was out and Voltron. And I would draw like attachments. This was when I was getting into my game creation kind of beginnings. I was putting like, oh, you have a robot with an arm, but it could come off or it could shoot off, and you could replace it with like a flamethrower or an electric whip or a buzzsaw blade or any kind of modular attachment that might be useful. Missile launcher packs, that kind of a thing. And I used to take apart my toys. I had a BB gun I took apart. And I had like a toy gun that made like space sounds or something that looked like futuristic, and I like combined them together and duct tape or something that made like a different kind of gun. That was pretty neat. This was like early inventiveness and things. I got into video games like with the Pong. It's one of the earliest game systems. It's just a plain old ping pong tennis game. What else was there? There was Atari 2600. We had games like Breakout and Adventure and Combat. That was big. My dad got into Pitfall. We used to play Pitfall together. And then, man, I don't even remember. There was a lot of different games. We only had a few. But you'd go to like school and they'd have different games. You'd borrow some off your friends. And like, I grew up in a trailer because I was poor, like I said. But it was alright. We had like a back porch we added onto it. It was kind of, it would get hot out there. I'd put a lot of junk out there. That's where I'd take apart my stuff, my toys, and I would like do experiments and things and create things and take apart a bunch of junk. I had boxes of junk back there. And we had like a bunch of wasps and spiders would get on the back porch, and I would take like a water gun and I would spray them, or I'd take a fly swatter and just swat them, and I would keep track of how many I killed. Like so many flies and so many wasps and so many spiders, and then I would kind of keep score. This was early, before video games, you know. I had to keep score because I'm competitive like that. I was competing with myself, but I was competitive. And my grandpa had a cabinet shop. He used to make cabinets. He always had a bunch of spare wood laying around, and my uncle, that's the same age as me, that later went to prison for meth, so you probably heard that story. He used to make swords and stuff. Like when the Ninja Turtles came out, I think we made like a sword thing and like a ninja staff. I don't know if we ever made side. We made nunchucks, and he would like core them out. He would make some nunchucks, right? He would core them out with a drill bit, and he'd get some lead car weights like on the side of your wheels to balance your wheels. So you take the lead and he'd melt it down. He would put it in the nunchucks, so it would be heavier. He actually would even make like paddles for school and take it to the teachers because the teachers wanted him to. And he would drill holes in the paddle so it was less air resistance for when they beat your ass, because there was capital punishment back then. And they had paddles with holes in them. I didn't even think about that just now. And back then we used to go to the flea market all the time, and we would get like, I mean, there's all these boring stalls at flea markets. People sell like yard sale crap and clothes and just boring stuff. Then you'll run across that one stall. It's like, oh, this guy's got baseball cards. And over here, this guy's got ninja weapons. What? He's got ninja weapons? And you go over there, maybe he has like some illegal fireworks too, and he's got like fucking ninja stars. You take those home and you throw them at each other, or you stick them in the wall. We used to have a little basketball goal. We'd do like slam dunk contests. We weren't like, it wasn't a 10-foot tall goal. We were just kids, but we'd use like a milk crate. We'd jump off of that. We'd lower the goal to where we could reach it. And it lived on the side of a hill, so the ball would just keep rolling, and it would be really annoying. We'd have to go chase it down. But I remember like, in each one of these stages of my life, I don't know if I mentioned this in the intro. I might have the first time, but I got kind of crazy. But each one of these parts of my life, I had like a money-making scheme that went wrong. I had some bad ideas. And maybe Twitch is the current version of that. We'll see. But like, when I was maybe 5, I got into drawing pictures a lot. And I would sit on the side of the road, a gravel road, in the middle of the boondocks, nowhere. No cars ever went by this road except for my uncle, because he's the only one that lived past us on this road. And I was going to like sell pictures on the side of the road that nobody ever came down. So that didn't work out very good. I think my uncle may have bought one for a quarter, and that was about it. And I had to throw it and start all over. But yeah, that was weird. And then we used to ride the bus. We would have sword fights with these weeds when we got off the bus. They were like hard, like sticks, pretty much. And sometimes like I'd find like dead trees in the woods, right? I remember one time I always would just like push these dead trees over because it's fun. But like I'd get off the bus and everybody was like watching, you know, I'd push over a dead tree. Made me look super strong, like fucking the Hulk or something, you know. I think one time, this was after everybody left, I saw a squirrel on a tree. I picked up a rock and I threw it at it, and it hit it and killed it. But it wasn't a normal squirrel. It was one of those flying squirrels with the webbed wings, you know? You can glide. I never seen one of those before. That was pretty crazy. And then, let's see, later on, my dad got us some bikes. Had a few bike wrecks. Used to do the card trick where you put the card on your spokes, make it sound like a motorcycle. Then we actually got motorcycles. We had like an ATV motorcycle we used to ride around. It was a pretty fun time. But then we kind of got into baseball card collecting back then. My uncle had a bunch of old, like, not Honus Wagner old, but pretty old baseball cards. They're probably worth something. So then we got into, that's kind of like the early introduction to the loot boxes and EA, kind of gambling kind of thing. Surprise mechanics, they call it. Yeah. So, that's pretty interesting, and I had a big collection. Then I started collecting comic books. Remember the book fairs at school was always good. I would get into some interesting books. Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys kind of stuff. They'd send you this little piece of paper, and it'll have all these books on it, and you would circle which ones you wanted, and then they'd come in, and you'd pay for them when they came in. I really loved doing all that stuff. I remember, like, the elementary school library, I had this King Arthur book I checked out, and it was like that thick. I read like half of it. I was like, oh man, I read half of this thick ass book, and I was super proud of it. I was even into some nerdy shit back then. I remember reading a book on spores, molds, and fungus, or mushrooms, fungus, and moss, or something. It was a weird book. Like, I was into some sciencey shit. I remember my parents, they didn't really try to make me smart or anything, but I remember, like, they had this salesman came by who was selling World Book encyclopedias, and they bought a set. And I would sit and read those things forever, because there's so much information in them, and, like, there wasn't any internet back then. If you had some encyclopedias, you could look up some shit. You could get the S one, look up sex, and see what that is. But I was more into, like, let's look up some military aircraft and see how to identify planes from the ground. That's the kind of stuff I was into. But, that's pretty much growing up life, I think. If you ever heard of Steve Simone, he's a comedian. He does this, Remember This special. I don't know how you can listen to it playing, but I heard it on Ari Shaffir's Skeptic Tank podcast, number 191. And he talks about, like, Saturday morning cartoons, and how he had these two brothers, and they would wake up and eat cereal and watch cartoons, and wrestling, and going to Chinese restaurants. There's a lot of cool stuff on there about growing up in the same time period. If you guys want to listen to that and try to get an idea of what it was really like, because it was pretty awesome. That influenced me pretty big, I think.